This lecture for government. First type of government to talk about are monarchies. This is king or queen. You have princes, princesses, dukes, etc., but there are types of monarchs. First is absolute monarchy. This is where the king and queen has all the power and they have all control. This usually leads to a system where the people are tied to the land. Feudalism is really just a form of slavery, so it's not really that good. The second type is called a constitutional or representative monarch. Most of the kings and queens we have today fall into this group. There is a king or a queen, but there's also a parliament or a congress, and they really have the power. They make all the laws. Typically the king is just a figurehead, but occasionally they are put in place to also carry out the laws. Then we have a different couple of types of democracies. The first is a republic, and this is what the U.S. is. People vote for representatives who then make the big decisions and make all the other laws and etc. The other type, and this happened back in ancient Greece, is called a true or a direct democracy. Every single person votes for every decision. This gets everyone's opinion, but is very, very inefficient because nothing ever gets done. Then we move on to dictatorships. There are basically one common theme behind a dictatorship, and that is one group of people or one person has all the power and everyone else just has to deal with it. Typically when we think of a dictatorship, we think of an autocracy. This is where one person has all the power. But typically what really happens is what's called an oligarchy. One person has the power and exercises control through a small circle of friends, a council, and this is much more common. Now, in addition to the forms of government, we have the levels of power. There's a chart on page 8 or 9 that breaks down all of this, but for the lecture here, we'll focus on the big three. A unitary, that's where all of the power is at the top and they dictate policy down below. A federal style, and that's what the U.S. has, all levels, the national, state, and local, all have power to establish laws, and they typically work together for the common good. Another type that we occasionally see is called a confederal. Now the U.S. has had this a couple of times. During the Civil War, the South was a confederation, and between when the U.S. wins the Revolutionary War and we develop the Constitution, we had a confederation. Each state makes their own laws, but they come together for big things like defense. Now, the last thing we're going to take a look at is who's going to lead in a system that's a democracy. And we typically have two big forms. We have a presidential and a parliamentary. In a presidential system, we have one ruler called the president. In a parliamentary system, you have a head ruler who's typically called the prime minister. They definitely have some similarities. They both have a legislature that makes the laws. They both have that executive, the top person who enforces the rules. The big difference is how they choose a ruler. In a presidential system, the people choose who that ruler is going to be. They also vote who the legislature is going to be. Now, it is very possible, and this typically happens in the U.S., where we have a democratically controlled Senate or House, but we have a Republican president, or vice versa. In a parliamentary system, the people vote for the legislature, and then the party that has the most seats in the legislature, they then pick who's the chief executive. So you will always have your president or your prime minister the same political party as your legislature. Now, that's typically more efficient, things get done more quickly, but there's also that drawback that when times change, you might actually end up with lots of changes. Presidential system, we don't have nearly as many changes, and for the most part, the status quo has suited us just fine. I definitely recommend you read the textbook on this. That will definitely help you with the homework section that's assigned to this as well.